What are the big differences between Elizabeth Warren and Bernie Sanders? I know a lot of people are asking that question after watching Elizabeth Warren today announce officially that she's running for president. She gave a great speech. I like Elizabeth Warren a lot. Let me show you. Actually, I made a compilation of clips from her speech. She spoke for about 40 minutes or so. But here are some of the highlights.
I am a candidate for President of the United States of America. The man in the White House is not the cause of what is broken. He is just the latest and most extreme symptom of what's gone wrong in America. But even after Trump is gone, it won't do just to do a better job of running a broken system. We need to take power in Washington away from the wealthy and well-connected and put it back in the hands of the people where it belongs. Shut down the revolving door between Wall Street and Washington. End lobbying as we know it. Ban members of Congress from trading stocks. How's that not already illegal? And make American companies accountable for their actions. Raise wages by putting workers in those corporate boardrooms where the real decisions are made. Break up monopolies when they choke off competition. Take on Wall Street banks so that the big banks can never again threaten the security of our economy. And when giant corporations and their leaders cheat their customers, stomp out their competitors, and rob their workers, let's prosecute them. I am tired of hearing that we can't afford to make real investments in childcare, college, and Medicare for all. I'm tired of hearing what we can't afford because it's just not true. Stop stalling on spending money, real money, on infrastructure and clean energy and a Green New Deal. Stop refusing to invest in our children and start asking the people who have gained the most from our country to pay their fair share.
I really like Elizabeth Warren. I really do. I think that she covers a lot of really great points, and I think it's really important for people to hear this. What I like about Elizabeth is, she's really bringing to the forefront the discussion about the corruption in Washington, and she's going to be, much to the dismay of the establishment, she's going to be exposing them during this campaign. That she's got a year and a half to do this, and believe me, she's going to. I found it really refreshing when she sat down with Rachel Maddow, and that was what she talked about. She just said, look, there's a lot of corruption going on here, and Washington's not working for the people anymore, and we need to rid the big money interest in politics. That's what's causing a lot of the problems. So I really like that. I like that message. I think that more people need to hear this, and I think with Elizabeth Warren out there and campaigning on this, more people will hear this. I also really like that she addresses that Trump is just the symptom of this. He's not the big bad boogeyman, and once we get rid of him, America is saved. He's just a symptom of the greater problem that's been going on. And this is something that I really believe. If we do not fix this system, Trump is just the beginning. You think Trump is bad? He's not nearly as bad as an ideologue that could come in and really do some serious damage. Imagine if somebody like Steve Bannon or Stephen Miller, his advisor, if one of those guys ends up, or someone like them ends up becoming president of the United States, somebody with an actual real true ideology, those people are the people that are extremely scary. So Trump is just a symptom. I love that Elizabeth Warren hits on that. I love that she's hitting on the corruption in Washington and the big money interests. I love all of this about her. So here's what the challenge is going to be moving forward. Now, also, I want to say that I really love all of these progressive candidates coming out. I do think the more the merrier. If you've got Tulsi Gabbard, Elizabeth Warren, Pete Buttigieg. I keep saying I've been wanting to do a video on him, and I still want to do a video on him. I need to just get all of my information together. But I believe he might be a progressive. And, of course, if Bernie Sanders throws his hat in the ring, then we'll have another one. I think this is great because it shows that the movement is real. It shows that there's this growing sentiment of disgust amongst the base that are just saying, look, we've had enough of this. And when we get more candidates in the ring rather than just the token progressive, then it really shows the force of the movement, and it forces the government to change. It really does, or at least it exposes them. Now, the big thing is that when people watch Elizabeth Warren like this, they're going to think, how is she any different from Bernie Sanders? She has the same talking points. She was talking about corruption in government and Wall Street having too much power and corporations having too much power. She's talking about Medicare for all and investing in infrastructure and investing in education and programs. So how is she any different? Well, in a lot of ways, they are very similar in that way. That's why they are more progressive candidates. But they're more progressive candidates than the others, than people like Kamala Harris or Cory Booker. And Harris is a interesting animal, actually, because she's pretty wishy-washy. She kind of goes with what, it's like today she's progressive because it's like the thing to be. But what matters, and this is what's going to matter in the distinction between Warren and Sanders, is where is their priority? Because when you're president, you only get so much to work with. You've got a Congress that's maybe against you, maybe they're for you, but you still get a limited amount of capital when you're sitting in that position. And you've got to prioritize what is the most important thing to you. And that is what you're going to push for. And you're going to push for it hard. And the big question is, what would someone like Kamala Harris push for? If she's in that position and everything is working against her and she's paddling upstream, what is she going to pick as her real, true priority? And this is the question about Warren and Sanders. And I think this is the big distinction between them. It comes down to their worldview, their priority, and their foreign policy. This is where the two candidates are not the same. So speaking of their worldview and their priorities kind of go hand in hand. Warren's worldview, and which then lends her hand to what she considers her priority. She's a capitalist. She was a Republican up until 1996. She switched parties when she realized the Republican Party was just kind of allowing the system to become more and more rigged and more tilted towards the wealthy and no longer in the interest of the American people. And that's when she left the Republican Party. But she has been a lifelong Republican up until a couple of decades ago. Now, mind you, it's been a couple of decades, so she's not like someone who just flipped parties yesterday. Bernie Sanders, on the other hand, has been an activist in unions and civil rights, and has been saying since the 70s, he's been on record saying that the wealthy have been controlling the U.S. government and the American people, and they have way too much power, and he's been saying this since the 70s. So Bernie Sanders has been extremely consistent in his worldview of the system is rigged, it's rich versus poor, and this is a big problem. And they're keeping groups of people poor in order to keep power away from them, whether you be black or you be a woman. This is how they're doing it. They're using power and influence of money in order to keep you down. So they're coming from different backgrounds, first of all, and this has really shaped their priority. So Warren, her priority is, clearly she's the anti-corruption candidate. Clearly she's running on a platform of, the system is rigged against you. We need to level the playing field. And she's screaming this at the top of her lungs. And I love that she is. I really do, because she's right. The system is rigged, and you can't get nice things because they're spending a ton of money. I mean, look at what happened with the ACA. The insurance industry spent $100 million just to fight it. And believe me, they're going to spend a lot more money to fight Medicare for all. Same thing with education system. And you name it, there's going to be a bunch of money that infuses Washington in order to fight it. So she's totally right on that. That's her pet project, and that is what she has dedicated her life's work to. It has been the issue of the playing field being tilted against the working class American. So if she's sitting in Washington, her priority is going to be fighting that. That's what she's going to be. That's going to be her big thing. She's wanting to put in codes of ethics, and she's wanting to regulate. It's a very top-down idea. It's, I'm going to regulate you, and it's for you to do the right thing. That's what I'm wanting you to do. I want to put in rules for fair play, which I think is a legitimate claim for sure. When you look at sports, for example, why is it football's fun to watch? Why? Because there's rules. You can't just get away with anything you want. There's an actual set of rules, and there's ethics and that you have to follow, and this kind of evens things out, and it's fun to watch. I mean, even football has, in a way, like kind of wealth redistribution in a way, right? Because what they do is, like, if you're the worst team in the league, then you get the first round draft pick. They give you the leg up. So, there's a lot there we could learn a lot from sports, I think, when it comes to running our government. And maybe that would help some Republicans and even some mainstream Democrats understand better how government should work. We need to make it a little bit more fair, like we do with sports play. And Elizabeth Warren, that's her idea. She says, let's regulate it and level out the playing field, and that'll help everybody. Now, Sanders' idea is a little bit different. He's saying, no, what we've got to do is empower the people and invest in the people. And when you do that, it will level things out. You've got to really put more power into the public, and that's got to be the priority. We can't wait for the elites to do the right thing or even try to force them to do the right thing. What we've just got to do is the right thing from the beginning and take the tax dollars that these people are paying into the system and give it back to them. Give them services that they need and want. I mean, that's what government and taxation should be for. So if Sanders is sitting in the White House, his priority is going to be that. He is going to be the guy. And I think actually the only politician who is going to sit there and demand Medicare for all. He's going to demand universal education. He's going to demand Medicare for all. And he's going to scream about that because those are his pet policy ideas. Whereas Warren is going to say, no, we need to just get rid of the corruption. And Tulsi Gabbard, I believe, would be more about, we need to stop the intervention, the military, the giant, war machine we've got going on. So it's kind of pick your candidate when it comes to the progressive movement in those ways. That's really where they're different. And people should know the differences between them because of, these if they got on the White House, what would they fight for the most? And if they could only pick one thing for their entire administration that they accomplish, what's that one thing? So you have to ask yourself as the voter, what is the one thing you want? Do you want less interventionism? Because they're all... Now, this is the other difference between Warren and Sanders. Now, she's shifting her worldview a little bit, her foreign policy view, to be more in line with Sanders and Gabbard, but she's not quite there yet. But what you've got to do when you're deciding on which progressive candidate you want to vote for, it's, do you want less intervention? Do you want Medicare for all and universal education? Or do you want less corruption? All three, Sanders is for all of those. Gabbard is for all of those. Warren is for 2 out of 3 of those. So make a decision. Now, also with Warren, let's go on to the foreign policy. And I've got some great articles that a lot of this information is in, and I'll link them down in the description below. They're worth a read if you've got time, where some of this information came from. When it comes to foreign policy, Elizabeth Warren is really more in step with the establishment. Now, she's shifted a bit. When she was on Rachel Maddow's show, she did say that she believes that the president is right in pulling troops out of Syria. So there's that. But she's pushed to back U.S. support for the Saudi-led war on Yemen. And she has, so she's not really for the war on Yemen. She's not for Syria, what's going on there. She'd like to pull the troops out. So that's kind of more in line with the progressives. But she's also pushed for military support for Israel against Palestinians. She calls Iran a bad actor. She says Russia and China are working to undermine the basic human rights we hold dear, and so on. She's lockstep in line with the establishment on a lot of the foreign policy stuff. She says North Korea is a big threat. Russia, China, North Korea, Iran. It's kind of that stuff going on there. And, while Bernie was voting against the huge military budget, the huge inflated military budget that also gave a bunch more money, I believe it was 60 or 70 billion more dollars towards these wars in Syria and Yemen, Bernie Sanders voted against it and Warren voted for it. So foreign policy, she doesn't have a strong stance there. And it doesn't really seem like she knows a lot about foreign policy. It seems like that's just she's good with corruption and government and what's going on in the financial stuff. But when it comes to foreign stuff, she hasn't been in the Senate long enough to really understand. And, a lot of these issues are complicated. She's, unlike Sanders, who's been sitting there for a long time, hearing about all this stuff for a very, very long time. He's got more insight because he's been around it and more exposure. And obviously, Tulsi Gabbard has been to war. And also, Warren says, and this is kind of weird, she says that really where the United States went wrong when it came to foreign policy was in the 80s. So she kind of says, well, it was since the 80s. That's when the shit hit the fan. And it's like, really? What about the Vietnam War? You don't think maybe that was... what about what was going on with Cuba? You don't think, what about all the banana republics we created? And I don't know. So foreign policy is going to be the big one, the huge defining factor, I think, for non-progressives when they're looking at these progressives. The easiest thing to cite between Sanders and Warren is going to be foreign policy. For progressives, it's going to really be which candidate do you want sitting in the White House with prioritizing what? What do you want them to really push for? If they can only get one thing through and one thing through only, which is likely, what's that one thing you want? So good to know. I do, like I said, though, I love Elizabeth Warren. I love that she's in this fight. I love that she's exposing the corruption in government. I'm really curious to see how they're going to try to bury her when it comes to this. I think she'll be buried less than the others because she isn't against the war machine, and because she's not against the war machine as blatantly as the others. I think that she might, they won't try to smear her as much, but they certainly are trying. I mean, the DNA testing thing was weird. I don't know. I mean, I thought, why is anybody making a big deal about this at all? It shouldn't even be a count against her. I don't know. It just seemed really silly. So it'll be interesting to see going forward what they try to dig up on her, what they try to do to her in order to silence her about the corruption that's going on in government. But there is a difference between the two, so tell your friends.